If you've been to this channel before, then you probably know something about merkins. Probably you've heard that they started in 1450, they were used by prostitutes who lost their real pubes due to lice or syphilis, and that nowadays they're used in Hollywood for nude scenes. Blah, 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 blah. This is all you ever hear. It's all over social media, and I've heard it so often, I'm starting to sing this song myself. Usually, it's accompanied by this picture of a merkin merchant. Although, quite often you'll find this merkin merchant completely on its own with absolutely no text, no explanation, just fending for itself. So I would understand if you thought that this guy really was a Victorian merkin merchant. Maybe you even saw some specifics. Maybe you heard that he's from 1860, or maybe from New York, or maybe really specific, like he's from London Spitalfields in 1827. Well, he's none of those things. This photo was taken in the 2000s. But don't feel bad if you didn't know. Two of my really good friends, both extremely overeducated, really curious, the kind of target audience for this channel. Hi, Paul. Hi, Keith. Anyway, they both sent me this picture because they know that I'm into merkins, thinking that it was the real deal. And if they got taken in, then anyone can do it. They're not gullible people, So today, I'm going to tell you the real story behind this magnificent merkin merchant, explain how you got duped and why it probably wasn't the only time, and go on a bit of a rant about attribution and the importance thereof. This is the Detangler, where we get to the root of why hair is so important that we humans put it in our art, rituals, and legends. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe to this channel, tell your friends, leave me comments, send me a thanks, join as a member. I really, truly value all of your feedback. So this photo is actually by a guy named Stephen Berkman, who lives in the LA suburbs and is obsessed with 19th century photography.
I think one of the things photography does the best is deal with the past, because all photographs are of the past.
In particular, he loves the collodion process, which was invented in 1851 and was an improvement over the more famous daguerreotype.
All the photographs are taken on glass plates using the wet collodion process. What you do is you take a glass plate, you pour collodion on it to make the silver nitrate adhere to it, and you put that plate into a bath of silver nitrate, and it becomes light sensitive after about 4 or 5 minutes. Put it into the camera back, expose the photograph, and you basically just remove the lens cap. So your subject's very still, and what happens is your subject, you sort of move past the resistance because they have to stay still, and something occurs to them, and I don't even look at them when I'm doing the photograph. I just know something's going to magically emerge.
Berkman uses all the original gear from the day, including lenses that he says are still covered in 19th century dust, which gives it a more authentic look and feel. To make this photo even more authentic feeling, he has invented a whole persona, an elaborate backstory of the 19th century that this merkin merchant is just a small part of. Here's the story. Berkman says that he found a scrap of paper which was watermarked Zohar Studios, and then by coincidence he found an empty old trunk that was also labeled Zohar Studios. The trunk turned out to have a false bottom, which was discovered by a trapped opossum, because this is a very elaborate backstory. Anyway, under the false bottom, there weren't the photos, but there was a notebook written by one Shimel Zohar. Shimel Zohar was a Lithuanian Jew who emigrated to New York in the 1850s and opened up Zohar Studios, where he took stunning portraits of the kinds of characters who populated New York's Lower East Side during the Civil War era. He took careful notes of all of his photo shoots, and that is what Berkman found in the old trunk. But the notebook was written in Yiddish, so he got his friend to translate, which he did, but then he died, and the notebook was lost in the confusion after his death. Convenient. I mean, how tragic. So, when pressed, Berkman admits that he didn't find the photos, but that he recreated them based on the descriptions that he found from the notebook, which doesn't exist anymore. The whole story contains references to another recently conveniently dead person and to Jewish mysticism, Kabbalah. It's convoluted and hard to explain, and the details just become more and more fantastic and incredible, as in fantastic like it's fantasy, and incredible like you can't believe it. So in reality, Shmuel Zohar was a fictional character, and all the people he photographed were fictional characters, coming from the brilliant creative mind of Stephen Berkman and our collective imagination as a culture that we've developed about Victoriana and Jewish immigrants.
Merkin merchant. It's probably hard to see. I'll just read what's on the box. J.G. Payne and Sons, because it's a family-run business. Purveyor of fine merkins. Private fittings available upon request. And serving the discerning pudendum since 1827.
The more pictures you look at from this collection, the more obvious it becomes that this whole thing is a beautiful, elaborate, gorgeous, wonderful, lovingly crafted hoax. When I say hoax, I mean it as much as any fiction is hoax. I mean, if you read a fictional novel, do you think that it's actually real history? Probably not. But when it's a photo, people are more likely to accept it as real, as a snapshot faithfully depicting what is supposed to be. In the case of the Merkin merchant, it does take a little bit of digging to get to the truth. But in today's bite-sized culture, nobody seems to have the patience for that. And maybe in our dystopian Orwellian future present, the truth doesn't matter anymore. And so you see this image and your brain makes sense of it. It seems plausible. You've heard about the Victorians, all their prudish sexual hang-ups, their fascination with the other, their circus freaks. I mean, why not a Merkin merchant? It certainly looks legit, thanks to Berkman's faithful use of the authentic materials, and it's a great picture, no doubt. In every single common thread that I saw on the many times that this picture appeared, the top comment is always about how his beard looks like he's wearing his own merchandise. And it totally does. I mean, you probably saw it too, right? It's hilarious, but in the form of something that seems so stuffy and old-fashioned, it doesn't look like itself is making the joke. It's something you noticed with your modern, sophisticated sensibilities and perspective. So it not only looks authentic, it flatters you into thinking that you're so clever to make this astute observation all on your own. Frankly, that's how visual culture works. We swallow what we're shown, we make assumptions that what we're seeing is a faithful illustration of what's being discussed, and we feel smart and flattered when we're led into obvious conclusions. We're somewhat aware that this happens in politics. We're a bit on high alert these days because we've been shown that AI can look really realistic, and we've heard so much about how media is really just propaganda. But we still get fooled. Here are just a few from the last few years that have made the rounds. All of these are meant to evoke an emotional reaction, play into your biases and assumptions. AI makes it worse, impossible to tell what's real. But we don't need AI to be duped. We've been gullible for ages. There are posed or staged photos, like this one from the end of World War II, showing the Soviet flag being flown over the Reichstag in Berlin. Well, this is staged. It's one of the most famous photos from World War II, and it's fake. These days, anyone can call themselves a journalist, and they might know how to take a good picture, but they probably haven't been trained in journalistic ethics, that they are not supposed to tamper with live news. And the editor who chooses which photos to run doesn't know, or maybe chooses not to notice which photos are staged. There are ethical guidelines that photojournalists and the more reputable news agencies are supposed to follow. So if something is labeled as AP or Getty Images, for example, it should adhere to their policies, which say that there shouldn't be any photo manipulation or staging. And they will retract photos if they find out that these guidelines haven't been followed. But oftentimes we're consuming images that have no byline at all. We're just making assumptions based on context. You know, this article is about XYZ, so this photo must be also about XYZ. But is it? Like with this picture, supposedly illustrating Biden's America, but really showing a different country in a different year.
An attack ad against Supreme Court Justice candidate Susan Crawford is using a picture of a different Susan Crawford. An ad launched by a group backed by Elon Musk instead used a picture of Susan P. Crawford, who's a Harvard University law professor.
This sort of thing is unethical photojournalism, no matter which side they're on. It's dangerous, it's lies, it's misleading. But I'm sure you know that you need to be vigilant when it comes to politics, right? right? This doesn't only happen in politics, though. I mean, we all know about advertising where models are photoshopped and airbrushed into being unrecognizable, unachievable standards of beauty. We all know this. We all say we're aware, but that steady drip, drip, drip of false information bores into our brains. You know, the more you see a narrative, the more you believe it. It's hard for anyone to resist. And I'm talking about even more subtle ways of fooling you, when images are taken slightly out of context or cherry-picked to tell a story from a particular angle. Like Roman Vishniak's famous A Vanished World, which shows Jews in pre-World War II Poland, all living in shtetls, very religious lives, when in reality there were Jews of all sorts. There were secular Jews, there were city Jews, and yes, a small percentage of them were these religious shtetl Jews. But now, after exposure to this time and time again, we've come to believe that this is the truth about pre-World War II Jewish people living in the old country. It's really easy to paint a compelling story backed up by images when you're not completely transparent with your information. And that's why I take such pains to label the images in my videos. I mentioned this in a video a few weeks ago, and a bunch of you told me that you noticed it and you appreciated it, which is very gratifying because it takes a lot of work and time to do that. So I understand why some content creators might skip that step. I don't want to call anyone out by name, but there are certain YouTubers who look and seem and smell like they're doing legitimate research, but it's impossible to know whether their images are faithful illustrations of what they're talking about or just eye candy unless they label it. This is important to me. For example, I had to abandon loads of photos that might have been used for my ancient Egyptian video because I couldn't find the attribution. Were they modern forgeries? Looted artifacts? AI generated? Who knows? I certainly don't know, but I'm not going to go and show you stuff and claim that it illustrates my points when I really don't know for sure. When I did my ancient Greek video, I came upon loads of images that were clearly Renaissance or modern, but were labeled as ancient Greek or Roman, which is not cool. It's lazy and misleading. Even in my video about David Hammons, who's still alive and more likely to be written about in a scholarly context, I found different versions of How You Like Me Now with absolutely no explanation as to why it looked different from the official one. I think we're more used to creators giving this kind of scrutiny to the written word. Like, for example, let's get back to the beginning where I was rolling my eyes over the standard definition of a Merkin. You know, so common it's common knowledge. It's so often repeated it's just become fact. Starting with the fact that Merkins appeared in 1450. This is stated in the Oxford Companion to the Body with no evidence, no references, no historical proof or artifacts to pinpoint the debut of Merkins to this date. The author of this article, one Amanda Barrow, doesn't come from any institution I can find. It just says archive. Not the London Archives, which is a thing, but just random archive. She has no track record or evidence of expertise in this area. I couldn't find her on the internet, and she only wrote this one article for the Oxford Companion to the Body. The article is nonsense. It mixes together a bunch of disparate, disjointed quotes and anecdotes that make no sense together. But because it has Oxford in the title, this gets quoted from everyone as if it's fact. I'm a YouTuber. I'm not a journalist. I haven't signed an ethical pledge. But I'm a researcher, and I'm part of this community of scholars, and I hope that you are too. I hope that you, like me, value truth in the information that you consume. I want you to find trusted sources, which is hard to do in this whirlwind of data and information that we're surrounded by. There's traditional media. They have ethical standards, which is reassuring, but they are biased and they move really slowly. Speaking of slow moving, peer-reviewed journals are considered the gold standard for serious research, but we've all heard about p-hacking, and anyway, these journals are kind of hard to find if you're not in academia, and frankly, they're boring. Realistically, most of us get our information from amateurs on social media and platforms like YouTube. I urge you to find content creators who are frank about their research, value the scientific method, upfront with their sources, and update their findings if they find out that they were wrong. And if you have a favorite creator who could do a better job with labeling and attributing their visual resources, send them this video. Let them know that it's important to their trustworthiness and their legitimacy. I hope that this didn't come off as a diss to the Merkin merchant. I love this photo a lot. It is art, and it's a mind game in the best way. It makes you grapple with your own perceptions of Victoriana, and it's great visual humor. I just want you to know that no, there were no traveling Merkin salesmen back in the day. Did you think that there were? Did you think that there should have been or could have been? What does that say about you and your education and your society that this fits so seamlessly into your imagination? Isn't it cool that we can have this nice, long, juicy conversation all prompted by just some funny hair? That is what we do on The Detangler.